Alright, if you watched the field cutting video, this is what the mower looks like when I got done. The label was already torn off. Again, it's for maybe 5 years old. Basically just ran over pine trees, small saplings, 2-inch trees, tall grass, 8-foot tall weeds, and mowed it right down just to prove that the Troy-Bilt TB240 was actually a pretty good mower. Alright, so you can see I've got it all cleaned up, well, mostly cleaned up. Basically what I want to do is put a tune-up on it for next year, so I'm going to change the spark plug or clean it depending on how it looks. Same with the air filter change, clean the air filter, clean up the fuel lines. I'm going to look in the gas tank, make sure there's no crud or crust in the gas tank. I've got a lot of stuff down in my rewinder. I'm going to just take it out, clean it up, make sure there's nothing in the way, make sure the cord's not frayed or anything like that. So once I get the top part of the motor done, I'm going to take the blade off. I'm going to replace the blade because I chopped that field down with it. Again, the blade was already 1.5 years, I think 2 years old maybe. I sharpened it a couple times over the summer, but time for a new blade. And I'm also going to look at the wheels, check the drive assembly. So I'm going to start with a 10mm. I'm just going to remove the top part that covers the rewinder here, or the rewinder, the top part that covers the start mechanism. Lift that off of there, and as you can see, the inside of it has a little bit of goo inside of it. So I'm going to clean all this out of here. The rewinder itself, or the winding mechanism, the teeth are still catching good. I don't see any wear marks on the actual top of my motor, which actually spins. So when you're pulling on this, you're spinning the engine around, which causes the motor to start. So that's working fine. Pulling my cord all the way out, there's no tears in my cord. The knot at the end of my cord's in good shape. The spring seems to be good. So I'm just going to clean this up really well and reuse this part. So I want to take the gas tank off in order to clean this out. I might take this off if I don't have to. I don't want to, but if I have to take it off, I will. I can probably get this stuff out by just taking the gas tank off. The fuel shutoff valve is right here. So you can shut the fuel valve off. I haven't turned it off probably ever. But that leads into the carburetor. The problem with this design is that they put the screw in on the middle of the fuel valve. But if you take off the fuel line here, this is a gravity feed, the fuel is just going to run out and run all over the place. So it would have made more sense to put the fuel valve and mount it over here to where you could take off the outside of it and actually take the valve off with the fuel tank. So you could just shut it off and lift the tank up off there. So basically what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to either drain the rest of my gas out, or I'm going to tip my mower sideways in my case, pull the fuel tank off so it doesn't run out through the valve in the bottom. Now if you tip the motor toward the carburetor, you're going to flood the carburetor. Alright, so now I want to take my fuel tank off so I can get all this stuff off the top of the mower here. Before I do that, the shutoff valve for the fuel is right here. So it's a gravity feed fuel tank, which means basically there's no suction, there's nothing that pulls the gas out, just the weight of the gas pushes down into the carburetor runs. The only way to get this off is to take the fuel line off. If you shut the shutoff valve off, the output side goes to the carburetor on this side, the input's over here. So if you shut the valve off and you take this line off, gas is going to run all over the place. So you're going to need to flip your mower up sideways, or you need to drain the gas out of it first. I'm going to turn mine up on its side, take the fuel line off, and with this top cover off, the tank will just lift up off over top of these screws. I'm going to remove my fuel line here. I'm going to take the clamp, slide it back this way. I'm going to break it loose on the side. This one's probably never been off. If it has, maybe once before. If it sticks on you, you might have to take a little razor knife or a knife and cut this a little bit. Don't cut the fuel valve itself. I'm going to get it to where it's just going to come loose and start to work it off. Again, I've got a little bit of gas in here, not a lot, but enough that it would make a mess. So I'm going to pull this back off of here. And since mine's being stubborn, I'm going to take a flathead screwdriver and just get it started. Once it starts to come off there, it should just pop right off, but again, mine hasn't been taken off forever, if ever. Now that I've got it started, it should slide off pretty easy, which it will. So I'm actually going to get it right to the point where it's getting ready to come off there. Squeezing the fuel valve or the line together. And then I can lift up on the tank without losing a ton of gas. Like so. I lose a little bit, but I don't lose it all. But basically I'm just pinching in on the fuel line really hard. You could take a pair of vice grips and clamp it. Or you can just drain the fuel out of it before you do that. So I'm gonna take my fuel tank, I'm just gonna sit outside so it doesn't stink up the garage. So with the fuel tank out of the way, I can easily get to my spark plug now. I can get to my carburetor or my air filter. I can get all this stuff off the top of the engine here and get all the excess stuff out of there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean up the top of the engine and then we'll get to the air filter and the spark plug next. All right, so I just took my compressor, blew all the stuff off the top. I'm gonna wipe down any big grease I've got on the side. This is not Rust Valley restoration. I'm not trying to restore the lawnmower. Just trying to make sure it's clean enough to keep on using for a couple more years. So I'm just getting all the big stuff off of it. I mean, if you wanted to take off each one of these pieces since you're taking it apart anyhow and hand clean every one of them, you could. It's not going to affect the performance if these are all full of goo, or like the top of this was full of grass or straw or whatever. You definitely want to clean that out. But as far as actually getting every bit of dirt off of here, if I polish that to a shine, it's not going to make the mower run any better or any worse. So I've got this, I'm going to pop off the air filter, and as you can see it hasn't been changed in a couple of days, so I'm going to go ahead and clean that out. Probably going to reuse this one. I'm just going to take my compressor, blow out the air filter, and I'm going to rinse this out real quick. So again, I just blew out the air filter. Borderline replacement. Like I said, I'm going to give mine one more year. I'm pretty brutal with my lawnmower, so if you wanted to, you could replace that air filter. Next thing I want to do is I just want to inspect my carburetor. I don't want to really take it off, so I'm just going to take this cover off. As I do, the carburetor comes loose on this model. I'm just going to kind of push in a little bit. Pull my screws out. And again, the carburetor is going to come loose in the back. So make sure you don't just pull hard and everything falls off. Make sure you notice how everything comes out. There's a gasket there. A stopper back there, so that slides up into the engine. So when you put this back in, everything lines back up the way it should. So I got that loose, I'll pull my other screw out. Put the screw out. Now between this plastic and the carb, there's another gasket in here. So make sure if this falls out, if it's torn or damaged, you replace that. So I've got my fuel intake, my carburetor, the air breather, which is right here, and then the carb itself. So up here at the motor, I'm just going to pull the fuel line off of the air breather housing. So I got the air breather housing out now. And if I'm not calling all this stuff the right stuff, sorry. Again, I'm not a mower mechanic. I just know enough about them to try to get it running again. And again, when this is back in here without the breather on it, you'll see this piece right here fits up in this hole. This piece fits on here. And then this is the choke for the mower. So when it pulls, it opens and closes the throttle valve. So this goes on the back side of that. And again, as you can tell by all the dirt and grease and grime on here, I'm going to clean these up real good and put them back in there. Okay, since my carb is nasty, I'm going to go ahead and take the carburetor off. Take the fuel line off first. This clamp has been on here for a while. I'm going to replace this clamp because it's not wanting to open for me. I'm going to destroy it when I try to take it off there. Same as when you're taking the fuel line off of the back of the fuel valve there. This is probably stuck. If it's been on there for a while, if you roll it back and forth like I don't know if you heard it pop or not, but you'll hear it pop loose. Once you get it broke loose, then you should be able to pull it off there. If you try to pull it too soon, you're just liable to break it right off the carburetor. So don't do that. And same as I did before, I'm gonna get a screwdriver and just work it back a little bit until I get a hold of it. trying not to cut this fuel line. I've got a 3/8 fuel line here, but I don't have a smaller one, so I'm trying not to cut it if I don't have to. I want to reuse these parts. So there's my fuel line off. Now you got to be real careful with this spring here. It's pretty flimsy. You do not want to break it. So I'm going to basically just slide it up out of the little hole that's hooked in. The rod itself, if you tilt the carburetor forward and kind of work it down and out, that'll just kind of weave itself off there. Down and out. So there's my carburetor off. And again, I'm going to take this out. I'm going to put some gum out on it. I'm just going to clean it up real good before I put it back in. All right, again, not Rust Valley restoration, but basically what I did is I got all the stuff that was up in here, anywhere near my springs, made sure the springs were cleaned up, just used some gum out, some brake parts cleaner, and got all the stuff off of it so the carburetor actually flows fine. Make sure everything turned evenly. And if you want to, you can pull this little 10 millimeter off here. This little bowl drops down and there's a filter in there. You can make sure it's clean. Make sure you've got a gasket for it before you take it off there, depending on how old your mower is. I'm not sure that I can get that. I don't want it to leak on me, so I'm not going to take mine off. Mine's been running fine. I run either an ethanol-free or like the canned gas from Lowe's in the wintertime when it might sit in there for a while, so I'm pretty sure my filter is probably good. One last thing to note too on the inside of your breather, once you get this cleaned up, once you replace this gasket, if you notice there's like a little question mark in there, see the little hole in your gasket, make sure that hole actually lines up to here. If you put the gasket on the wrong way, it'll seal the carb, but it won't allow the air to escape out of there. So make sure you put the gasket in the correct direction. And again, this is going to be hard to do because it's going to be facing the motor. You're going to push it through, and you can't really see what you're doing. So if you line it up there in the first place, you'll know it's in the right direction. Okay, so after I got the carb off, got everything cleaned up, I'm going to just use some Goo Gone heavy-duty wipes. These aren't the best in the world, but for what I'm going to do, I'm basically just going to clean up the fuel lines. It's really good at getting the old grease and the dirt off of them. And again, this is not trying to restore it. I'm not trying to make it look new. I'm just basically trying to clean up anything I can get to pretty easy. And the more grease you get off of here, especially around your cables, around the springs and stuff that make the engine run, you're just going to be better off in the long run. It's going to make your engine last a lot longer. And just clean off around where the carb goes. You want to make sure this is a nice clean fit. Got a little bit of gasket material right here left over, so I'm going to take a little emery cloth and knock that off of there, just so I know it sets real good. The fins of the motor, make sure your fins don't have anything down in there. That's what actually cools your engine. So if those are full of stuff, your engine's going to run hotter. So I'm just going to run this down in there and make sure they're fairly clean. Wipe off my muffler. Again, if you want to get super fancy, you could come in here and you could get some paint. You could paint that thing up again. You could paint your deck. Same people do that. I'm just going to go cut grass with it so mine doesn't have to look pretty. I'm not trying to impress anybody. As long as the grass gets cut, I'm happy. I'm basically just wiping off whatever I can see right off the top of my hand here. And again, this deck, when I'm all done, I'll take some gum out, spray the deck off, blow it dry. But for now, I just want to make sure all my mechanisms are clean. My arms are clean, my springs all look good. I'm going to take a drop of 3-in-1 oil and put on each one of these springs when I put it back together. My coil looks good. Clean my coil wire off. Clean the coil itself off. You want to get super technical. There's probably a gapping for that coil against the engine casing there, but I'm not going to get that extreme with it. Again, mine starts on the first pull just about every single time, so I'm not going to mess with the coil. I'm just going to check the plug. Just going to clean off my gas while I'm here too. My oil. This is gas, not oil. It's like one Goo Gone wipe. Bunch of goopy gone. And again, you can take that and hit those fins and make it nice and shiny black again. I'm not too worried about that. Pull the plug out. Not sure what that was, but plug's out. Looks to be pretty good condition. I'm going to clean it up, put it back in. It's not burnt. It's a little dirty. It's white, so the motor's been running a little bit lean, but again, I'm running ethanol-free gas in it, so I kind of expect that. So to clean my plug, I'm just going to use a little bit of emery cloth. Again, I'm not going to go super clean. They make spark plug cleaners. You can put it in there, blast them, and clean them, but I'm just going to clean the threads back off. We'll try to clean the point up a little bit there. Spray it with a little bit of brake cleaner and put it back in. So we're going to put the plug back in. Same as with the carb, I'm just cleaning up around the plug. Not a whole lot there, but just want to make sure I got a nice clean seat for the plug to sit in. Start my spark plug. Tighten these. You want to tighten up to crush the gasket, but not tight enough you break it off in the engine. Just looking up in there, it's nice and clear, so I'll pop it back on. So the plug's done, ready to put the carb back on it. So ready to put the carb back on again. Just a drop of 3-in-1 oil. I'm not going to drop it down in the carb. Just on the spring. It doesn't need much, it'll work itself around there. That's where it catches. Put a drop right up in there. And again, it will work its way in. And you don't want to saturate it because you don't want it catching a bunch of dirt and creating a problem. You're just preventing a problem. So that's cleaned up. Everything's moving freely. Sit it right there in place. Get my flat gasket. My flat gasket, again, you'll notice it's got a hole to the side also. Make sure you line that hole up with the hole in the back of the carburetor. So the carb's going to go in this way. Little tiny hole. Lines up with a little tiny hole on the carb, so it looks like that. So when you're putting this back together, you've got gasket, mechanism, gasket again, carburetor, and then breather housing. I'm gonna have to do this without the camera because I gotta stand right in front of it to do it. Okay, I'm gonna try to do this without making too big of a mess out of it on the camera. Basically, I assembled my carb and everything through the housing. So I've got housing, gasket, carb, paper gasket or big gasket, carb or choke plate, and then the back gasket. So what I want to do, I've replaced my clamp, as you can see on my fuel line. I'm going to go ahead and stick my fuel line on, and unfortunately I can't get the camera on both sides at the same time, but basically put your fuel line back on, put your breather line back on. Once the breather line's back on, then I'm going to just lift this up in one big piece. Again, make sure your gaskets don't get pinched. They should all be going the right direction. Make sure the holes line up with the carburetor. Make sure the hole lines up with the back of the carburetor on the gasket. I'll start these by hand, just so my carb doesn't fall out. And when I tighten these down, I'm just going to snug them. I'm not going to over tighten them. I'm just going to snug them up. Just strand those down there, and again, I'm going to snug these, not tight at all. Just tighten up with the, you make the seal between the carbs and the gaskets. Again, we're tightening it into aluminum. If you over tighten it, you're going to crack it, or you're going to break your bolt off in the engine, and then you're buying a new motor. So snug, not going anywhere, not going to fall off. Next couple steps will go pretty quick. Basically, the air filter will go back in, like so. I'm going to grab my housing. Housing just clips on the bottom. So I'm going to hook it in the bottom first. Raise it up and in. Snap that in place. So far we've cleaned the motor up fairly well. We've done the throttle lines, made sure they were clean, lubricated our springs, cleaned out our carburetor. So I'm going to put a link in the description or in the video here to changing the oil on this. I've done this once before. I'm looking at my oil. My oil level is still good. My oil is not really bad. I think I changed it, I want to say in the springtime. If nothing else, I changed it last fall. So I'm not going to change the oil again. Again, I'll put a description in there, but if not, you can get a little hand pump. Lowe's, Home Depot. Basically, it comes with a hose, a handle, and you can just pump the oil straight up out of the engine. And then replace the engine oil if you want to do that. But again, I'm going to leave my engine oil alone. Looks fine this time. Put my top back on now.